Sometimes the loneliest person in a city is the one whose face everyone recognizes. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Seattle, nearly every television screen in America carried the same story. Financial reporters discussed stock prices. Business magazines displayed the same photograph near checkout counters. Online articles analyzed every move he made. Alexander Brooks had become one of the most recognizable billionaires in the country. Investors followed him. Journalists quoted him. Politicians invited him to events. Millions of people knew exactly who he was, or at least they thought they did. Yet only 3 miles from downtown Seattle, inside a small family-owned diner called Harbor Street Cafe, there was one person who had absolutely no idea. Olivia Harper balanced 3 coffee mugs on a tray while weaving through a crowded lunch rush. At 28 years old, she had perfected the art of staying calm in chaos. Orders flew in from every direction. Plates disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. The cash register rang nonstop. None of it seemed to bother her. Olivia moved with the confidence of someone who had spent years solving small problems before they became large ones. She smiled easily, worked hard, and rarely paid attention to anything happening outside her own world. Business news meant nothing to her. Celebrity culture bored her. She once joked that she could walk past half the famous people in America without recognizing them. As it turned out, she was right. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly. A tall man stepped inside, carrying an umbrella. Several customers glanced up immediately. One man nudged his wife. Another customer quietly reached for a phone. The newcomer seemed accustomed to such reactions. He acknowledged nobody. Instead, he walked toward the booth beside the front window and sat down. Alexander Brooks had been coming to Harbor Street Cafe every Thursday for nearly 4 months. He always ordered the same thing: grilled chicken sandwich, black coffee, no dessert. He never arrived with assistants, never mentioned his companies, never discussed business. It was one of the few places left where he could sit quietly and pretend the world did not know his name. Olivia approached his table carrying a coffee pot. "Good afternoon," she said cheerfully. "The usual?" Alexander looked up and smiled. "You remembered. You have ordered the same thing 17 times. He laughed. "That obvious?" "Extremely." Olivia poured fresh coffee into his mug. Around them, several customers continued stealing curious glances toward the billionaire sitting by the window. Olivia noticed none of it. To her, Alexander was simply another regular customer. Maybe one of the nicer ones. Nothing more. Alexander watched her return to the counter. There was something refreshing about the way she treated him. No awkward excitement. No special attention. No attempt to impress him. She never asked what he did for a living. Never searched his name. Never looked him up online. At first, he found it amusing. Then he found it rare. Eventually, he found himself looking forward to Thursdays. Outside, rain tapped softly against the cafe windows. Inside, Olivia laughed with a customer near the register while Alexander quietly watched from his booth. For the first time in years, he had met someone who saw only the man sitting across the table, not the billionaire everyone else saw. And without realizing it, Olivia Harper had become the only blind spot in Alexander Brooks's entire world. By the following Thursday, the rain had disappeared, leaving Seattle wrapped in cool autumn sunlight. Harbor Street Cafe hummed with its usual rhythm. Plates clinked. Coffee machines hissed. Regular customers occupied their favorite booths. To Olivia Harper, it felt like every other Thursday. To Alexander Brooks, it had quietly become the best day of the week. At precisely 12:45, he stepped through the front door. The bell chimed above him. Several customers immediately recognized him. A middle-aged man near the counter whispered something to his wife. A college student sitting by the window glanced up from a business magazine and froze. None of that mattered to Alexander anymore. His eyes automatically drifted toward the counter. Olivia was laughing at something one of the cooks had said. The sound carried across the cafe. Simple, unforced, real. For reasons he could never fully explain, it made him smile. Olivia spotted him a few seconds later. "Window booth," she called out. Alexander nodded. "You know me too well. That is because you are predictable. I prefer consistent." Olivia laughed and grabbed a coffee pot. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it felt remarkably normal. That was precisely why Alexander kept returning. The rest of his life was anything but normal. Earlier that same morning, he had spent 2 hours in meetings discussing international expansion. Reporters waited outside his headquarters. Investors monitored every public statement. Assistants scheduled every minute of his day. Yet inside Harbor Street Cafe, none of that existed. Here, he was simply Alexander, a customer who liked black coffee and preferred sitting near the window. Olivia poured his coffee and placed a menu on the table, even though both of them knew he would order the same thing. "You know," she said, "one day you are going to surprise me and order dessert. That would ruin my reputation." "What reputation?" Alexander nearly laughed into his coffee. If only she knew. The reputation of being boring. Olivia pretended to consider it. Fair point. Then she hurried off to help another table. Alexander watched her move through the cafe. She remembered birthdays, refilled drinks before customers asked, helped elderly regulars carry takeout bags to their cars. She treated everyone exactly the same. The wealthy attorney who came in on Fridays. The retired mechanic who occupied the corner stool every morning. The tourists who occasionally wandered inside. Nobody received special treatment. Nobody received less. That quality fascinated him. Across the room, two businessmen wearing expensive suits entered the cafe. Both immediately recognized Alexander. Their expressions changed the moment they saw him. One approached the booth cautiously. "Mr. Brooks?" Alexander looked up. "Good afternoon." The man smiled nervously. "Huge admirer of your work." Alexander thanked him politely. The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. When the businessman left, Olivia returned carrying a sandwich. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "Not exactly. You seem to know a lot of people." Alexander shrugged. "Occupational hazard." Olivia placed the plate in front of him. "Well, whoever they are, they look terrified to talk to you." Alexander smiled. "Maybe they were having a bad day." Olivia shook her head. "Or maybe you are secretly more important than you look." For a brief second, Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. Olivia laughed and walked away before he could answer. She had no idea how close she had come to the truth. And as Alexander watched her disappear into the lunch crowd, he realized something that made the secret feel heavier than ever before. The more he looked forward to seeing Olivia, the harder it became to imagine the day she finally discovered who he really was. By November, Harbor Street Cafe had become more than a place where Alexander Brooks stopped for lunch. It had become a refuge. The booth beside the window felt strangely familiar now, almost like an anchor in a life that rarely slowed down. Outside, Seattle drifted through another gray afternoon beneath low clouds and steady wind. Inside, warm lights reflected against polished wood tables while customers escaped the cold with coffee and conversation. Olivia Harper moved through the cafe carrying a tray of drinks. As always, she seemed to know exactly who needed a refill before they asked. Alexander watched her greet an elderly customer by name, then stopped to help a young mother fold a stroller near the entrance. She never appeared rushed, even when the diner was packed. It was one of the many things he admired about her. She paid attention to people, really paid attention. In Alexander's world, attention usually came with conditions. People listened because they wanted something. Investors wanted confidence. Reporters wanted headlines. Competitors wanted information. Olivia wanted nothing. That was what made her different. That afternoon, she approached his table carrying a fresh cup of coffee. "You look tired," she said. Alexander glanced up. "Do I?" "A little." She tilted her head. "Long week." He laughed softly. "That obvious? You have the same expression my father used to have after working double shifts." The answer caught him off guard. "Your father worked double shifts?" Olivia nodded. "Construction. Most of my childhood." She placed the coffee cup in front of him. He always said being tired was not the problem. What was? Not having a reason to be tired. Alexander smiled. "Your father sounds wise." "Sometimes." She laughed. Other times he thought duct tape could solve everything. For several minutes they talked while Olivia worked nearby. The conversations never felt forced. They drifted naturally between stories, observations, and harmless jokes. Yet there was something unusual about them. Olivia never asked the questions most people asked. She never wanted to know his net worth. Never asked about business deals. Never asked why strangers occasionally stared when he entered the cafe. The absence of curiosity should have made things easier. Instead, it made the secret feel heavier every week. Later that afternoon, Olivia carried a stack of menus toward the counter when a customer sitting near the register called her over. "You know who that guy is, right?" the customer asked quietly while glancing toward Alexander's booth. Olivia followed his gaze. "Alexander." Yeah. What about him? The customer looked genuinely surprised. You seriously do not know? Olivia laughed. Should I? Before the man could answer, another customer interrupted with a question about a takeout order. The moment disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Olivia forgot about it within minutes. Alexander, however, had noticed the entire exchange from across the room. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Relief mixed with guilt. Relief because the secret remained intact. Guilt because he was beginning to understand something uncomfortable. Every week that passed made honesty more difficult. Not because Olivia would care about his money. Deep down, he knew she would not. The real fear was different. What if she eventually learned that everyone else knew the truth except her? And what if the thing that hurt her most was not who he was, but the fact that he never trusted her enough to say it himself? December arrived quietly, bringing shorter days and holiday lights that appeared across Seattle almost overnight. Harbor Street Cafe looked different now. Small strings of warm white lights framed the windows. A decorated tree stood near the entrance. Soft seasonal music drifted through the dining room, while customers escaped the cold with coffee and conversation. For most people, it was simply another holiday season. For Alexander Brooks, it had become something more complicated. The secret he carried no longer felt harmless. Every Thursday, he told himself he would explain everything. Every Thursday, he found a reason to wait one more week. That afternoon, Olivia noticed something was different the moment he walked through the door. The usual calm confidence remained, but something else lingered beneath it. Uncertainty. She greeted him with a smile. You look like somebody stole your favorite coffee mug. Alexander laughed. That's specific, very specific. He settled into the booth by the window while Olivia poured coffee. Rough week? She asked. Not exactly. Then what? Alexander glanced toward the window where snowflakes drifted through the gray afternoon sky. For several seconds, he seemed to search for the right words. Have you ever kept something from someone because you were afraid telling the truth might change everything? Olivia leaned lightly against the booth. That sounds serious. Maybe it is. She considered the question carefully. Depends on why you are keeping it. Alexander nodded slowly. Fair answer. Before he could continue, a group of customers entered through the front door, forcing Olivia back to work. The conversation ended unfinished, yet it stayed with her throughout the afternoon. Across town, the rest of Alexander's world moved at full speed. His face appeared on financial news channels discussing a major charitable initiative. Magazine covers featuring his photograph filled bookstore displays. A large downtown billboard promoting a citywide education project displayed his name in letters several feet tall. Seattle seemed covered with reminders of who he was. Meanwhile, inside Harbor Street Cafe, Olivia remained completely unaware. The contrast would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew the full story. A few days later, Alexander attended a fundraising event benefiting public schools. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked questions. Guests filled an elegant ballroom overlooking the waterfront. During the event, one of his longtime advisors approached him. You have been distracted lately, the advisor said. Alexander smiled. Have I? You are thinking about something other than work. That is unusual. Alexander looked across the room without answering. The advisor followed his gaze before laughing quietly. It is the waitress, is it not? Alexander shook his head with a reluctant smile. She has a name. Does she know who you are yet? The question immediately erased the smile. No. And when are you planning to tell her? Alexander stared at the city lights beyond the ballroom windows. That is becoming the problem. The advisor nodded knowingly. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Later that evening, Alexander found himself standing alone outside Harbor Street Cafe after closing time. Snow rested lightly on the sidewalk. The lights inside had already been turned off. Through the front window, he could see the familiar booth where so many conversations had happened. For the first time, he admitted something to himself that he had been avoiding for months. He was no longer protecting the friendship by keeping the secret. He was protecting himself from the possibility of losing it. And deep down, he knew that sooner or later, the truth was going to find its way through the front door. January arrived with clear skies and sharp winter air. Seattle looked brighter after the holidays, but for Alexander Brooks, the new year brought very little clarity. If anything, the contrast between his two worlds had become impossible to ignore. During the mornings, he appeared on business networks discussing economic forecasts and charitable initiatives. By afternoon, photographs of him appeared online beside headlines about billion-dollar investments and national leadership awards. His schedule remained packed with meetings, interviews, and public appearances. Yet every Thursday, he still found himself driving across the city toward Harbor Street Cafe. That was the one place where none of those things seemed to matter, at least for now. One Thursday afternoon, Olivia arrived at work carrying a small stack of local newspapers she had picked up from a neighborhood grocery store. She dropped them near the counter while helping prepare for the lunch crowd. A few minutes later, one of the cooks grabbed a newspaper and pointed toward a photograph on the front page. "That guy is everywhere lately," he said. Olivia glanced over briefly. The newspaper remained folded in a way that obscured most of the image. "Who?" she asked. "Some billionaire." Olivia shrugged. "Good for him." The cook laughed. "You really do not care about rich people, do you? Not enough to read about them." She returned to organizing menus without another thought. Across town, Alexander sat through a conference room presentation while staring absent-mindedly out a window. The speaker discussed projections. Charts filled large screens. Numbers dominated every conversation. Yet his attention drifted somewhere else entirely. He found himself wondering whether Olivia had ever looked at one of those magazines near the diner register, whether she had ever noticed his photograph on television screens, whether she would laugh if she discovered how many close calls had happened over the past few months. Later that day, Harbor Street Cafe grew unusually crowded. Rain had driven people indoors, and nearly every table was occupied. Olivia moved quickly between customers. At the same time, a television mounted above the counter played a local news broadcast. Most customers ignored it. So did Olivia. She was too busy carrying orders and refilling coffee. Then the station cut to a segment about education funding across Washington state. Alexander's face appeared on the screen. Several customers immediately looked toward booth 7. A young woman sitting near the window recognized him and whispered excitedly to her friend. The timing could not have been worse. Olivia walked directly beneath the television carrying a tray of drinks. Without looking up once, she continued toward another table. The segment ended less than 30 seconds later. The moment disappeared. Another close call. Across the room, Alexander watched the entire thing unfold. Relief washed over him, followed almost immediately by frustration. The universe seemed determined to keep the secret alive. That evening, after closing, Olivia sat with her older brother Ethan at a small neighborhood diner. They met there every few weeks to catch up. As they talked, Ethan suddenly glanced toward a business magazine sitting near the cash register. "You know," he said, "that billionaire guy looks familiar." Olivia barely looked up from her coffee. "What billionaire guy?" Ethan pointed toward the cover. Olivia turned her head casually. Unfortunately, a customer stepped between them at exactly the wrong moment, blocking her view. By the time the person moved away, Ethan had already changed the subject. Olivia never saw the cover, never saw the face, never saw the name. Driving home later that night, Alexander could not stop thinking about how long luck could possibly continue, because every missed opportunity seemed to be pushing them toward something bigger. And somewhere deep inside, he had begun to suspect that when the truth finally arrived, it would not come quietly. The truth finally arrived on a cold Thursday afternoon in February. Not through a television broadcast, not through a newspaper, not through one of the countless close calls that had somehow missed Olivia for months. It arrived through something much simpler. A conversation. Harbor Street Cafe was unusually busy that day. Rain tapped against the windows while customers filled nearly every table. Olivia moved between booths carrying coffee refills and lunch orders. The familiar rhythm kept her focused. At exactly 1 o'clock, Alexander sat in his usual booth beside the window. For a while, everything felt normal. Then a group of visitors entered the cafe. 3 men and 1 woman dressed in business attire. The moment they spotted Alexander, their expressions changed. Olivia noticed immediately. It was impossible not to. One of the men walked straight toward the booth. "Mr. Brooks," he said with obvious excitement. "I cannot believe it is actually you." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, almost imperceptibly. Olivia had never seen that expression before. It looked like someone watching a storm approach. "Good afternoon," Alexander replied politely. The visitors remained standing beside the table. "Our entire company follows your work," another said. "Your foundation helped fund our community project last year." Olivia slowed near the counter. For the first time, She listened carefully. Would it be possible to get a photo? One of them asked. Several nearby customers immediately turned toward the booth. The cafe seemed quieter all at once. Alexander agreed graciously. The group gathered around him. Phones appeared. Smiles widened. Pictures were taken. Olivia stared from across the room. Something felt strange. Very strange. After the visitors left, one of her regular customers waved her over. An elderly retired teacher named Margaret who had been eating lunch there for years. You really do not know, do you? Margaret asked gently. Olivia frowned. Know what? Margaret looked toward Alexander's booth. That man. Olivia followed her gaze. Alexander. Margaret nodded. That is Alexander Brooks. The name landed without meaning at first. Olivia waited. Margaret looked genuinely shocked. The Alexander Brooks. A pause. Then everything shifted. Olivia felt her stomach drop. Not because she suddenly recognized the name. Because she recognized the reaction. Every puzzled stare. Every whispered conversation. Every strange encounter she had ignored. Slowly, pieces began fitting together. The businessmen. The photographs. The comments. The near misses. Wait, she said quietly. The billionaire? Margaret nodded. One of the most famous business leaders in America. The cafe sound seemed distant. Olivia turned toward the booth. Alexander was already looking at her. Not surprised. Not confused. Almost resigned. As if he had been expecting this moment for a very long time. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Olivia walked toward him. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. She stopped beside the table. Alexander slowly set down his coffee cup. Olivia. It was the first time she had ever heard uncertainty in his voice. How long? She asked quietly. Alexander did not pretend to misunderstand. Since the day we met. Silence. Olivia looked out the window. Rain slid down the glass. Months of conversations flashed through her mind. Every Thursday. Every joke. Every story. Every opportunity he had to tell her. Finally, she looked back at him. Everybody knew. Alexander lowered his eyes. Pretty much. The answer hurt far more than she expected. Not because he was a billionaire. Not because he was famous. Neither of those things mattered. What hurt was something much simpler. She had trusted him. And suddenly she realized that the one person in Seattle who had not known the truth had been her. The following week felt longer than any week Olivia Harper could remember. Harbor Street Cafe remained exactly the same. The coffee smelled the same. The regular customers occupied the same booths. Rain continued to drift across Seattle's gray skyline. Yet nothing felt familiar anymore. Every corner of the diner carried memories she now viewed differently. The booth by the window. The conversations. The laughter. The small moments she had believed were built on honesty. For the first time since meeting Alexander, she did not look forward to Thursday. She dreaded it. When Thursday finally arrived, she considered calling in sick. The thought lasted less than a minute. Olivia was not the kind of person who ran from difficult conversations. Still, when the clock approached 1 o'clock, she felt her stomach tighten. At exactly 1 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Alexander stepped inside. Several customers recognized him immediately, just as they always had. The difference was that now Olivia noticed it too. Every glance, every whisper, every reaction she had somehow missed for months. Alexander walked toward the familiar booth, but this time he seemed uncertain, like a man entering unfamiliar territory. Olivia continued wiping down the counter. Neither spoke at first. The silence stretched across the room. Eventually, she picked up a coffee pot and walked toward the table. The gesture felt automatic after so many months. She filled his cup. Then she sat down across from him. It was the first time she had ever done that. Alexander looked surprised. Olivia. She folded her hands together. I need to understand something. He nodded immediately. Anything. For several seconds, she searched for the right words. Why did you not tell me? The question hung between them. Simple. Direct. Honest. Alexander looked down at the coffee cup. At first, I thought it did not matter. Olivia stared at him. And later, he exhaled slowly. Later, it mattered too much. She remained silent. Alexander looked out the window before continuing. The first day I came here, you treated me like a normal person. You did not know my name. You did not care about my companies. You did not ask for anything. His voice remained calm. That had not happened in years. Olivia listened without interrupting. I kept thinking I would tell you next week. Then next week became another week. And another. Because you were afraid? Alexander nodded. Yes. The answer came immediately. No excuses. No complicated explanation. Just honesty. Olivia looked away. Outside, rain traced lines across the glass. Do you know what bothers me? She asked quietly. Probably. It is not the money. Alexander gave a sad smile. I know. It is not the fame either. I know that too. Olivia finally met his eyes. It is that everyone else knew except me. The words landed harder than either of them expected. Alexander lowered his gaze. There was no defense against the truth. You are right, he said softly. And I am sorry. For several seconds neither spoke. The noise of the diner faded into the background. Olivia studied the man sitting across from her. Strangely, he still looked exactly the same. The same thoughtful eyes. The same calm expression. The same customer who ordered black coffee every Thursday. The billionaire had always been there. She simply had not known it. I keep trying to figure out which version was real, she admitted. Alexander looked confused. What do you mean? Olivia leaned back slightly. The man everyone knows. Or the man who sat in this booth every week. Alexander answered without hesitation. The man in this booth. For the first time since learning the truth, Olivia believed him completely. And somehow, that made everything both easier and harder at the same time. The conversation stayed with both of them long after Thursday ended. For Olivia, the hardest part was realizing that trust could be damaged even when intentions were good. For Alexander, the hardest part was understanding that honesty delayed long enough eventually begins to look like dishonesty. Neither of them found easy answers. The following week, Alexander did something unusual. He did not go to Harbor Street Cafe. Thursday came and went. Booth 7 remained empty. Olivia noticed immediately. She told herself she was only observing a missing customer. The explanation sounded reasonable until she caught herself looking toward the door every 15 minutes. By closing time, she felt strangely disappointed. The next Thursday was the same. No Alexander. No black coffee. No quiet conversations by the window. Harbor Street Cafe continued operating normally, but something felt absent. Olivia finally admitted the truth to herself. She missed him. Not the billionaire. Not the public figure. The man who listened more than he talked. The man who remembered details from conversations months earlier. The man who had made an ordinary booth feel important. On the third Thursday, a small envelope appeared at the cafe. It was addressed simply to Olivia. Inside was a handwritten note. The handwriting was neat and unmistakably personal. There was no expensive stationery. No corporate logo. No grand gesture. Only a short message. Alexander wrote that he wanted to give her space. He wrote that he understood why she felt hurt. Most importantly, he wrote that she had been right. He should have trusted her sooner. At the bottom of the note was a single sentence. The only thing worse than losing a friendship is realizing you caused the loss yourself. Olivia read the note 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in her apron pocket. Something about the simplicity of it affected her more than she expected. There was no attempt to defend himself. No explanation about being famous. No mention of wealth. Just accountability. That weekend, Olivia found herself thinking about every conversation they had shared. The more she reflected, the more one fact became impossible to ignore. Alexander had hidden his identity, but he had never lied about who he was as a person. Everything she admired had been real. His kindness, his patience, his concern for others, his quiet sense of humor. None of those things depended on his bank account. On Sunday afternoon, Olivia visited a community center near downtown Seattle to help with a volunteer event. While carrying supplies through the lobby, she stopped suddenly. A large photograph hung on the wall. It showed the opening day of the center several years earlier. Standing among dozens of volunteers was Alexander. Not wearing a suit. Not standing in front of cameras. Simply helping. Nearby, a plaque listed community projects funded over the years. His name appeared repeatedly. Yet what caught Olivia's attention was not the money. It was the consistency. He had been doing this long before she met him. Long before there was any reason to impress her. That realization changed something. Late that evening, she sat alone beside her apartment window watching rain drift across the city lights. For the first time since learning the truth, she stopped asking whether Alexander should have told her sooner. Instead, she began asking a different question. Was she willing to let one mistake erase everything else she knew about him? And as the rain continued tapping softly against the glass, Olivia realized she already knew the answer. The challenge now was deciding what to do with it. Spring arrived quietly in Seattle. The rain became softer. The days grew longer. Cherry blossoms appeared along neighborhood streets, adding color to a city that had spent months wrapped in gray skies. Life moved forward, as it always did. Harbor Street Cafe remained busy. Customers came and went. Coffee continued to flow. Yet every Thursday, Olivia Harper still found herself glancing toward the booth beside the window. Old habits were difficult to break. One Thursday afternoon, nearly a month after receiving Alexander's note, the familiar bell above the cafe door chimed. Olivia looked up automatically. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things. Alexander Brooks stood in the doorway holding a folded umbrella. He looked exactly the same, yet somehow different. Perhaps because this time there were no secrets left between them. The cafe seemed to pause around them. Alexander noticed her immediately. Neither smiled at first. Neither spoke. Then Olivia walked from behind the counter and approached the booth by the window. The same booth where everything had started. Alexander pulled out the chair opposite him. Olivia sat down. Outside, sunlight reflected across rain-washed sidewalks. Inside, the quiet moment felt strangely familiar. "Hi," Alexander said. Olivia smiled faintly. "Hi." The simplicity of the exchange made both of them laugh softly. Months of complicated emotions suddenly felt smaller. Not unimportant, just easier to carry. For a few moments they talked about ordinary things. Work, the weather, a local baseball team that seemed determined to disappoint its fans every season. The conversation flowed naturally, almost as if the interruption had never happened. Eventually, Alexander became serious. "I never expected forgiveness," he admitted. Olivia looked at him carefully. "Good." He blinked. "Good. Because forgiveness is not something people earn by expecting it." Alexander nodded slowly. "Fair point." Silence settled briefly between them. Then Olivia reached into her apron pocket and removed the folded note he had written weeks earlier. She placed it gently on the table. "I carried this around for days." Alexander looked surprised. "You did?" She nodded. "Because I kept trying to decide what bothered me more, the secret or the reason behind it." Alexander waited quietly. Olivia looked toward the window. "The truth is, I understand why you were afraid." For the first time, genuine relief appeared on his face. Not because the problem disappeared, because she finally understood. "You were wrong," Olivia continued. "But I understand it." Alexander smiled sadly. "That might be the most generous thing anyone has said to me all year." Olivia laughed. Then she looked directly at him. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." Her smile widened slightly. "I like the guy who ordered black coffee and sat by the window." Alexander's expression softened. "That guy is still here." "I know." The answer came without hesitation. In that moment, Olivia realized something important. Learning that Alexander was a billionaire had changed many facts. It had not changed his character. The man she had trusted, laughed with, and cared about had never disappeared. He had simply been hidden behind a title everyone else noticed first. Several minutes later, Olivia stood and picked up a coffee pot. "You know," she said, "I never actually got your order." Alexander looked up. "You already know it." "I do." She smiled. "I just wanted to hear you say it." He laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind she had missed more than she realized. As she refilled his coffee, sunlight streamed through the window beside booth 7. Customers continued their conversations. The city moved on outside. And for the first time in months, everything felt exactly where it belonged. Because sometimes the rarest thing in the world is not wealth or success. Sometimes the rarest thing is finding someone who sees who you are before they learn what you own.